All right, as promised, continuing to find voices that I see in Arizona and across the country that have Vin Scully imprinted on their lives as the legend passed away last night. Mark Reda worked in sports television production with Vin Scully. Very formative years for him and his career, and I wanted to have Mark come on board because it's a different view of the man when you hear the voice coming out than what is going on behind the scenes and the amount of time you spend together. I
Yeah.
appreciate you coming on, Mark, first and foremost.
Well,
And
thank you, Brad.
yeah, the time that you first met Vin Scully, that it's like, wow.
Well, I grew up in Southern California, and so I thought I knew Vin Scully, right? You're listening to him on the radio every night. Um, in your formative years as a baseball fan and so you think you know Vin, but when you get a chance to work with him, um, it was amazing because he was exactly the person that you heard on the air.
Hmm.
He was as he was personable, intelligent, well read, uh, great conversationalist, very caring man. You could tell that in his broadcasts. And so when you met him and he was exactly the same way, it was just a gift. It was a gift to be able to work with him.
How much baseball did you learn from Vin Scully?
Well, I mean, from the day I started listening to baseball and listening to Vin, I learned a lot. And so I learned a few, there are a few more things I learned about baseball. I'll tell you this story. So I was the graphics producer. So I was producing the graphics and lower thirds on players. And one time I put up a stat about a player, second in the National League with 8 game-winning hits. And you remember that stat that they started, game-winning hits?
Yep.
So we're on the air and he says, don't you just hate that stat? And I almost died. I'm sitting in my chair. I'm like, oh no. And afterwards he just told me, and he was right. I mean, the stat was whoever drove in the run that was one more than the opposing team. And so if you win 8-1, the guy that drove in the second run had a game-winning hit, and it didn't reflect what it was supposed to reflect.
Right.
But he interacted with us in the truck. He would, and this was the day he did something that I've always told, in my work working with broadcasters, what they should do as a baseball broadcaster on television. He would a player would come up, he'd say something about the player, but was not specific. He'd say, he's really hot. He's really a hot hitter. And he'd wait a pitch. And then if you had that graphic, which gave the numbers, then he would just say, look at the numbers, instead of reciting the numbers as soon as he had the idea. I learned how the truck and the booth was supposed to work together in supporting each other. And the most important thing was listening to him, because I learned so much about just situations and what's a good piece of information in certain situations. It was it was the graduate school of baseball broadcasting.
When it was a game day, you would meet with him before. There'd be the usual team meeting and he would go over things. Was that the usual case or not?
Well, no. What would happen is when he would come into the booth, we would have a time where we'd show him things. So we didn't have a sit down meeting. He would be in the booth, and he would always pre-record his open, and then we would show him graphics and elements. I mean, back in the day, from 1985 to 1992, these are the years that I worked with him. Yeah. You didn't have the full array of production elements that you have now, but he would go over things, and if he liked it, he'd say it, and if he didn't, if he wanted to change it, we would change it, and then it was just a situation where we would just try to coordinate some of those things.
How much about life did you learn from him?
My well, during that time, I was really starting out in the business. I was in my 20s. I was having a lot of fun, and by the time it was over, by 92, I had been married for 6 years. I had a kid, our first child, and so it was more about how do you create that good, as they say now, work-life balance. Because when you're doing baseball, when you're doing sports, you're on the road at least half the time. And so I asked him about it because he was a wonderful family man. He was really devoted to his children and did a lot of things with them. And he was a devoted grandfather and great grandfather. But he told me, and I remember this, to this very day, he said, when you're home, be home. Don't take your work with you. Don't have things that you want to do with work. Just when you're there, be present for your kids. And that has stayed with me my entire life.
Before I get you out of here, was there a dinner or a life on the road moment with Vin Scully that was like, Brad, I will always cherish and remember this moment?
Well, there were a lot of them, Brad, just being able to sit down with him and talk with him. I have a story. It's kind of long.
It's fine.
I'll try to make it as short as possible.
All about? I got a 30-minute Zoom here. You got time.
Okay. Well, so the first year that I came into New York City with the Dodgers, and we pull up to the Grand Hyatt, and the bullpen catcher, whose name was Todd Maulding, says to me, "Hey, do you want to go out to dinner?" So we go up to our rooms, we come back down, we meet, and we're walking out, and some guy says, "Where are you going?" And we say, "Hey, we're going to go to Little Italy to eat." And he says, "Well, you don't want to take a cab. That'll cost you, so it's 85. So that'll cost you $25 or $30. I'll put you in my limo for 20. And so we're like, sounds like a good deal. So he drives us around, and we're going it's like we take forever to get to Little Italy. And he drops us off the restaurant. We go to the restaurant. We have a really nice dinner. We wander around a little bit. And now we're like, oh no, we've got to get back. And that's like a $25, $30 cab ride. So we hail a cab. We get in the cab. Boom, boom, boom. 3 minutes, maybe a little bit more, $7, and that's the cab ride. So this guy took us, they saw us as rubes. So I told Vin this story the next day before our game. So this is a Friday night game. We're in New York. They're playing the Mets. This is like 1985, 86. So the Mets, they're a really good team.
World Series. Yep.
And so I think we were getting beat pretty bad. So he tells our director, Mark Wolfson, he says, "Could you take a shot of the bullpen?" And I had this feeling. And so he goes and tells that story on the air and he talks about it, and it's from Todd's perspective. Well, he tells the story, and he says Todd and a friend went out to dinner, and then tells the story. And he says at the end, he came to the Big Apple and he was taken. And so, it's a great story. He tells it fantastically, much better than I did. So now I asked Ben after the game, I said, "Why didn't you mention my name?" He goes, "Well, we have to protect our team, our broadcast team. So I didn't say your name." Well, unbeknownst to him, Todd Maulding's fiance was listening to the broadcast.
Oh.
And so when he said Todd Maulding and a friend went to dinner, she thought it was another woman. She calls him, she gives him a ration. And so then Todd comes back the next day and tells Ben that it's like, you got to tell him that it wasn't, that it was Mark, or, so, but it was a Saturday, and it was Saturday baseball. when the networks had baseball, and so it was only a radio broadcast. So the Dodgers, force of habit. The Dodgers got beat again, and so Todd ran to Ross Porter, who did the post game for radio, and told the story again, but included me in it so he would clear it up with his fiance. Life on the road.
Life on the road. Your last time with Vin Scully, do you remember it?
Absolutely. I had just retired from my position at Fox Sports Arizona, and I was taking a little trip on Southern California. So one of the stops was Dodger Stadium, and I went up to the booth to talk to him, and he was gracious as always. He was always gracious. I have people who have even today reached out to me and said, thank you so much for, introducing me to Vin and taking me to the booth. And he was always so gracious. So we talked, and I just wanted to make sure that I told him how much that I cared about him and how much I appreciate what he had done for me, both in my career and in my life. And so that was the last time I saw him. And it's a good time, and I was able to tell him how much I cared.
That's great. That's great stuff. Mark, I appreciate your time and your insights. Thanks.
Thank you, Brad.